We're also going to work with, in the second part of this video session today, we're going to work with some terms when we're dealing with dominant and recessive traits, or dominant and recessive alleles. So first of all, we need to look at lettering, and I'm going to use the capital T and the lowercase t. Now you'll notice that I do a little curve on the bottom of my lowercase t. That's to make it look like a T instead of a plus sign. Okay, so when you have a capital letter, it generally refers to dominant, a dominant trait. We're going to say a dominant allele. Okay, the lowercase letter will generally refer to a recessive allele. And I'm just going to write next to this capital for a capital letter and lowercase. So again, capital letters refer to dominant alleles and lowercase letters refer to recessive alleles. Now, every trait that is expressed in an organism is expressed with two alleles. So if we have two capital letter T's, like when we're dealing with pea plants, like when Mendel was doing with his pea plants, two capital T, the letter T was representing tallness or shortness. And so two capital T's meant that the plant showed a tall characteristic. So I'm just going to write TT, capital T, sorry, is equal to tall plants. And if I had the two lowercase t's, then that plant would show the characteristic of shortness and be short. So it would be a short plant. However, if an organism has one of each of the alleles, one capital dominant, one lowercase recessive allele, the dominant always shows up. And so therefore the dominant characteristic, in this case tallness, would show up. So you would have tall plants again. Now, to go along with looking at these items, we have a few other terms that come into play. If you have two of the same allele, two capitals or two lowercase, then those particular organisms are considered to be homozygous. So homozygous alleles simply mean they are two identical alleles, whether they're two identical capital letters or two identical lowercase letters. If we have two different alleles, like with this particular organism, it is considered heterozygous. So this here would be same alleles, and heterozygous would be different alleles. And then we have one more item to touch upon using this information. If we are talking about an organism using capital and lowercase letters, if we're looking at capital T, lowercase t, or capital T, lowercase t, when we're dealing with this, these are all genotypes of the organism. So the genotypes tells us about the genes. If we are talking about it being tall or short, then that's talking about organism's phenotype. And a phenotype tells us about the physical characteristics. So to kind of help remember that, when we're looking at genotypes, it tells us about the genes themselves. So gene. When we're looking at a phenotype, it's going to represent or talk about the physical characteristics. Phenotype begins with PH, physical begins with PH, not a coincidence. So we have genotypes telling about genes, and phenotypes talking about the physical characteristics. Now, we're going to use all this information, especially this part right here, when we're dealing with our next lesson on Wednesday, talking about Punnett squares.